Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today's guest is former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney. In 1992, Cynthia won a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. She was the first member of Congress to demand an investigation of the events of 9/11. She was the first member of Congress to file articles of impeachment against George W. Bush. Cynthia introduced legislation to release documents related to the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She voted against every war funding bill put before her. In 2008, Cynthia McKinney won the Green Party nomination and ran for the U.S. president. In February 2010, McKinney was awarded the Peace Through Conscience Award through the Munich American Peace Committee. Cynthia speaks out everywhere she goes against war and injustice. You can find her on Twitter, Facebook, or you can visit her site, allthingscynthiamckinney.com. And I am very happy to have her on the X22 Report Spotlight. Cynthia, welcome to the Spotlight.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be with you.
Thank you for being on here. And I wanted to start off with what it was like being in government and what you saw. And specifically, I want to ask you, did you get the feeling of corruption? Did you get the feeling that maybe people were being blackmailed? Or was it just one big happy family and no one mentioned that at all?
Well, yeah, it was the ups and downs and highs and lows of life. So was it all good? Well, it was good. For me personally, great experience, but were there highs and lows inside that experience? Yes, there were. One of the lows was when I realized that it was kind of all like a show. I'm in a committee, and the committee finishes its deliberation during the committee meeting. How can I say? There was some contention there, and so the members and the panelists that are being interviewed are somewhat in a disagreement. And then at some point at the very end, they end up walking out arm in arm. And so that was really, really kind of startling for me, because I really believed that what I was doing, what I was seeing, what I was experiencing was real. But it was only at that moment that I realized that it was all just kind of a game, and that I had been taken. I had just, been taken. So that was definitely a low point for me. But lots of other high points as well.
Do you think people call them the deep state, like there's this background force where they're really calling the shots? When you were in government, did you feel that there was this other force that was in the background controlling everything?
Oh, yeah, I came into contact with it. I mean, this force, as you call it, yeah, it's a force, but it's got eyes and ears and arms and legs. It's individuals.
When you said you came in contact with it, just explain, what do you mean by that?
Well, how can I say? Individuals come and they come to you and expect you to do certain things. You say yes, everything is fine. You say no, then you got a problem. And unfortunately for me, I've said no a lot. But, there are these offers that you get for going along with the program, and that happens a lot.
Were these like elected officials, or were these non-elected individuals? Who were they exactly? Are you able to say?
Well, like for example, I've written in my book, Ain't Nothing Like Freedom. I wrote about one instance. Say, for example, there's a meeting and you go to the meeting, you're invited to the meeting. So you go to the meeting and then you find out that you're supposed, well, actually, I didn't go to this meeting. I sent a representative. My representative was astounded when he went there and found there was a former member of Congress that was there. There was a radio personality that was there. And they had already hatched up. When I say they, I don't mean the member of Congress and the radio personality. What I mean is the people who called the meeting had already hatched up the plot. And this was prior to the division of Sudan. Everything you've been told about Sudan is a lie. I can tell you that.
So wait, everything that we're hearing about Sudan is not what we think. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
And so there's this meeting. They've already hatched out the plot. And in this particular plot, they wanted me to get arrested because the ultimate objective was two things. It was regime change in Sudan, and then it was the the balkanization of Sudan, so the creation of two countries out of the one. And so if you got rid of the leader of Sudan, then you would have two very compliant puppets. And that was the purpose. So you would have the compliant puppet in the South, and you would have the compliant puppet in Khartoum. This is the way. So Sudan was spared the bombing because they were successful in getting it done. But what they wanted was me, because I had this reputation of being honest and, integrity, and the African heads of state, they truly loved me. And so they wanted me to abuse the love that people had for me because I would, I was a straight shooter. And so they wanted me to get arrested in front of the Sudan embassy. Now, remember that there were members of the Congressional Black Caucus who ended up getting arrested in front of the Sudan embassy. But this was all a game. It was all a charade. It was all orchestrated. And it was because I and Michael Jackson, both of us, said no. Michael Jackson was supposed to get arrested with me, and then we were going to be bailed out by Olsen, I think. It's in my book. All of the details are in my book. So I said, no, you know what happened to me. Michael Jackson said, no, you know what happened to me. Some members of Congress, they did go and they got arrested in front of the Sudan embassy. The ICC went to work against the leader, the Khartoum leader. Sudan eventually was split into two separate countries. And of course, Sudan as an entity has not kind of recovered. It's sort of like was done to Sudan in a very quiet way. Nobody was paying attention, of course, and so they allowed it to happen. Everybody felt that what happened to Libya was justified, and so they let that happen. Another African country, the U.S. is bombing Somalia. Somalia hasn't been allowed to have a government since the fall of the Soviet Union. And that's because the last real government that Somalia had was Siad Barre, and he aligned with the Soviets instead of the Americans. And so, so you could just go on and on and on, go down the list, and you can see who is orchestrating all of this, who controls, say, for example, you have certain individuals, like, for example, when Madeleine Albright, now these are all the African countries, because I was focused on Africa, even though ultimately my problem arose around Palestine. And so Madeleine Albright goes to Sierra Leone, and she holds up a little kid who doesn't have any arms, and she says, it's hard to shake hands with babies that don't have hands. And the reason that they didn't have hands was because there were certain individuals who were interested in the diamonds. The purest, biggest diamonds on the African continent are in Sierra Leone. And so they wanted to get access, unfettered access to those diamonds, of course, without paying anything, because we don't need to pay the Africans for the cobalt. We don't need to pay the Africans for the copper, the uranium, the titanium, the coltan in the Democratic Republic of Congo. No, we don't want to pay them for the gold. We don't want to pay them for the diamonds. We want to get it all for free. And if free means dead Africans, then that's all right. And so I wrote a scathing letter to Bill Clinton, Madeleine Albright, CCing the whole foreign policy gang, saying how hypocritical this was for Madeleine Albright to have said that, because the Clinton administration, along with the UK, actually orchestrated this. And that was by refusing to label a real terrorist organization that had terrorized the Sierra Leonean people after they had democratically elected their president. And their president said, well, we want to get paid for our diamonds. Then they found someone who was willing to kill other Africans. And I'm talking about Foday Sankoh, the Revolutionary United Front was the name of the organization. And so then that's when the raping of the little girls and the chopping off of the hands of the little boys, that's when all of that began. They fed them with drugs, and they did all kinds of things. And then when Sandline went into, which is a mercenary outfit that had been employed by the UK, they actually went into Foday Sankoh's home, and they found a letter from Maurice Templesman saying, we can work together. You're somebody I can work with. But Sierra Leone had gone through, they had gone through everything, every abomination, so that Maurice Templesman could get the diamonds. And of course, we're talking about Lazard Frere. So yeah, these companies, this is what they do. Democratic Republic of Congo, home to the majority of the world's coltan, which is used in our smartphones, our laptops, all of our electronic gear, the little watch that I have that tells me how many steps I've taken. And so we don't want to pay for this stuff. We want to get it for free. And the free means any number of African lives. So 1 million in the Rwandan genocide, well, that's all right. It's free to us. And so when I introduced legislation to stop the importation of coltan from Democratic Republic of Congo, then all of a sudden I start getting visits from Microsoft and Gates Foundation. And so then automatically you discover who these forces are. And you can do that in every part of the world. So I didn't get into trouble because of what I was doing on the African continent to interfere with, or what I learned about the activities of these forces on the African continent, but it was what I was doing with respect to Israel and Palestine that ultimately got me. Now, all of this has to do with part of this, the two deep state factions. Now, according to my theory, we now are witnessing two deep state factions fight each other. And so Hillary Clinton was the head of one of those deep state factions. Now, the one that she was the sort of, not the head of, but I mean the public face of one, and John McCain and Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio, all of these people, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, they're all public faces of one particular faction of the deep state.
So they're all part of the same faction, all those individuals you just named.
Yes. And so, but you see, it's the process. And I exposed it when I complained that I had to sign this pledge to Israel, which I said, okay, I'm not going to sign it because I need to get elected first. And I need to understand the issues, and I need to understand what the U.S. interest is. Then I, will talk to you guys. Well, that was not the answer that normal people give. And then that's when I found out how tied into the campaign finance system the Israel First faction is. If you want to get elected, I mean, if you look at the campaign in Georgia right now, where obscene amounts of money are being spent. Well, now you see, you spend the money, somebody gets the money. And so then what happens is that, they talk about the welfare queen gaming the system. This is totally offensive language when you're dealing with millions and billions of dollars being gamed by these deep state people. That's how they become deep state in the first place. So they're gaming the system. And so a campaign then goes to their lawyers, their consultants, their media people, their mail consultants. And so before you know it, what you've done is this money is literally churned over and over and over again. The same people are giving it, the Sheldon Adelsons if you're on one team, and the Haim Sabins if you're on another team. So these people give the money, and then you've got the bevy of all of these Washington, D.C. consultants that live off of that money. And so ultimately, even the process of the campaign itself becomes a game. And that's a deep state game as well. That's a deep state ploy. So basically, back to these two factions. So you got these two factions that are duking it out right now. And Catherine Austin Fitts calls them the empire builders and the piggies. And so the empire builders are the ones who are out, engaging in all these wars with all these global designs. They have been called the globalists, I call them the Ziocons, and I got that from an internet buddy of mine who coined that term, the Zionist neocons. So in my estimation, it is these people who are they are Israel first. So that's why you will hear a John McCain say, I don't know what America first means, or John McCain and John Lindsay. I think they both said it. They don't know what America first means. The reason is because they are being paid very well to not be America first. And anybody who thinks that they're America first, like their constituents, They're sadly mistaken. So John McCain can travel all over the world, dubbing this one ISIS, and has a lot of money to hand out because that faction is in control of literally billions of US dollars. Okay, and so then there's this other faction, the one that Catherine Austin Fitts calls the piggies. They're just, the greedy bots. And I call them the Pilgrims. So these are the people, as she says, as Catherine says, so you've got the empire builders and the piggies. The piggies are the ones who are gaming both of them are gaming the system, feeding at the trough, and the image of the welfare queen is a fat black woman, which is totally offensive, totally inaccurate, but this is the way they do. And so then they have average ordinary Americans hating black people when really we ought to be looking at them. Okay, so the empire builders, according to Catherine Austin Fitts, don't care anything about the U.S. And I would have to agree with her, because these are the people who want war against Russia, war with Iran, war in Syria, all these wars. And if it destroys the United States of America, then, so be it. We'll just move on to our next target. But
so let me just stop you here. So these people, they don't really care about the country. They're not working for the people. They're working for the deep state, their deep state, and they're getting paid by these individuals. And they don't care about the country. If the country's destroyed, it doesn't matter to them. They'll just move on.
So now when I say that they're getting paid, I mean that they're in Congress, they have power, they have access to, what can I say? You DC madam,
right.
They have access to things, and they get the protection for their perversities.
So that is going on in government. Are you talking about having different sexual things happening within government? Either it be a woman, a man, a child. You're talking about that.
I'm talking about that gambling, trips, particularly if you have to go back and look at the trips that members of Congress take. They're called CODELs, congressional delegations. And one could investigate patterns. And some of these trips are off books, so you won't even know that they took place. Who was it that told me that they are... Oh, yes. And you look at some of the congressional scandals. So this getting paid means not just an exchange of dollars. There's an exchange of so much more. Okay. And so now back to the theory. So there's a professor at the University of Connecticut whose name is Dr. Peter Turchin. And he actually had come up with this theory of, how can I say? I guess you'd call it a deep state theory, but it's actually a theory about history and inputting historical facts into a database to ascertain whether or not, or the extent to which patterns can be discerned. And so what he came up with is that in periods of boom, the deep state grows. And so it grows in membership. And then what happens is there's not enough positions of power to satisfy the individuals who consider themselves to be worthy inside the deep state. And so the deep state factions off. Now, I began to see this when I would go, George Webb has talked about the DCCC. Well, members of Congress live at either the DCCC or the DSCC, which is where the senators go. And that's basically where you go to raise your money and everything. And the DNC is in the same building. RNC, I would presume that the RNC has a similar operation going on over in I think it's the Eisenhower building is what it's called. So it's a little white building across the street from the Cannon office building. And so you've got these parallel situations going on, which I believe is part of the problem with the Trump administration is that they have, or the Trump administration, the POTUS himself, President Trump, has picked people who are part of the swamp. Now, it's okay to have people who are part of the swamp if they were fighting the swamp, but you can't have people who are part of the swamp who were part of the swamp. And so then you can't become a fighter of the swamp with people who are of the swamp. They are swamp monsters themselves. They were born in the swamp. So you get someone, for example, like Reince Priebus, his background is not in fighting the swamp. And so, it's so easy to make silly mistakes. And I will say that, yeah, I made some mistakes, and it's easy to make those mistakes when you're fighting the swamp. So you need to have people who are experienced at fighting the swamp if you really want to drain the swamp. You got to know where the plug is. And so anyway, these are my observations as well that correlate well with the theory. So you've got these two deep state factions that are fighting. There's not enough positions to award to them because there's only so many presidents. There's only so many ambassadorships. There's only so many of these positions. And so I believe what happened was, quite frankly, the Pilgrims, those are the ones that say, well, wait a minute. We need to protect the United States. If we go to war against Russia, we could be defeated. We could be nuked. And, the United States is done with. So let's try and figure this out in a rational manner. Well, one thing that marks the Ziocons is their pursuit of their goals no matter what. And so they appear sometimes to be irrational because very little deters them from their goal. And so if you look at what's happening now, the U.S. military has been used to destroy whole countries. U.S. foreign policy apparatus is used to balkanize countries. I mean, even if you look at Yugoslavia, what happened in Yugoslavia. Now, Yugoslavia is the country that got wiped off the map. Israel has no intentions of being wiped off the map, and Israel has very powerful allies. And the ones that are not allies, they're temporary coalitional powers. So it's a coalition that's not like an alliance, a lasting alliance. So Israel is in pretty good shape. And those countries that have been targeted are the Muslim countries that have been targeted for complete destruction, are the Muslim majority countries. But anyway, that's a geostrategic thing that's going on. And we're talking about the deep state. Now, so you've got this. At one point, I think the members of the deep state were quite united in, okay, we'll let you go along with this. The Pilgrims and the Ziocons were united in the war game because the Pilgrims were getting money from the war machine, and the Ziocons were getting their geostrategic goals for Israel. They were getting those goals accomplished. So there was harmony, but it was when the Ziocons went too far, which is, and we're not going to stop with Iran. We're going to keep going. We're going to get to Russia. And if we can't co-opt China, we're going to get to China too. And this is what we're going to do. Then that's when the bifurcation started, the split began. And in earnest. And so then we got the possibility for Trump to erupt through this mess that has been created. Well, so he comes up with an anti-regime change wars message. Let's deal with the infrastructure of the U.S. Let's take care of the people of the U.S. The U.S. first. Let's get out of these destructive trade agreements that have destroyed middle class life in the U.S. These hollowed out towns like Cleveland, where the Republican convention was held. I had a liberal, progressive, left friend of mine who went to Cleveland and said, no wonder there's a movement. My friend is from New York and hangs around with New York leftists and really had not seen the sort of destruction that has taken place across the U.S. And in these what used to be solid working class, middle class towns where men could support their families and work with dignity, is gone now. And we can thank NAFTA for that. Of course, I'm from Georgia, and I saw firsthand what happened in Georgia with the textile industry, and mostly women who were in the cut and sew businesses. They lost them. They went to Mexico and eventually to China and eventually to Bangladesh and other places. Bangladesh cut and sew operators, the ready-made garment industry, lowest paid workers in the world. And so imagine how lowly paid or how low the payment was in the U.S., but people still were able to eke out a living, and now there's nothing in its place. So the American heartland has been ravaged by these policies that enriched the pilgrim class of the deep state. And that's where you get, for example, Bain Capital and the stories of the workers at the companies, and that's Mitt Romney. So the Pilgrims got wealthy as the people of the U.S. got poorer. And but then when the war began to bump up against real enemies, not pushover enemies that could be literally wiped off the map, like a Sudan or a Libya or Iraq. But now, Somalia, let me not forget Somalia, you can take over whole countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, you can bomb them with impunity, so we can take them over. Yeah, that's all right. But then we're going to split Pakistan into several different countries, and we're going to split Syria. We're going to split Iraq, and we're going to literally wipe them off the map. This is the objective to which U.S. military forces are being applied. And need I also say our tax dollars, much largely without protest from the people of the U.S. There are a few of us who were labeled with names called, and when I questioned September 11th, called kooky, loony, all kinds of names, but you could say that I was the ultimate U.S. firster. True. I was asking the questions because that was what I saw that was so reprehensible. So anyway, so now you've got these two deep state factions. They're fighting each other for ascendancy. And Trump becomes the public face of what we think is one of those factions. And that's the faction that I call the Pilgrims. Those are the ones who say we're not going to sacrifice the U.S. And then all of a sudden, Trump does an about face, and we can't explain why.
So do you think he moved over to the other deep state? Do you think they got him now?
Well, he's basically surrounded by the Israel firsters, the Ziocons. He's surrounded by the Ziocons. And so what amazes me is that you've got these people who are inciting the people of the United States to hate Muslims, but Muslims don't control the Federal Reserve. Muslims aren't the ones who are orchestrating all of this, not from what I saw from inside. People need to check. They need to do their homework. They don't need to be pulled emotionally into the first hate group that you can find. No. Just as methodically as the U.S. has been depleted, we need to look at the experience of other countries around the world that have suffered the same fate. For example, the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union fell and Russia and became Russia, who was at the helm? Well, certain promises were made to Gorbachev. Those promises were not kept. And Boris Yeltsin was an alcoholic, was given a whole lot of money. But who were the oligarchs that were created out of the parastatals that were in Soviet Union that became Russia? Who were those oligarchs? If you know who those oligarchs are, then you can understand what one faction of the deep state has in store for the U.S. So now comes this summer of resistance. Resistance to what? Resistance to what? The media have been so successful in inciting the people of the U.S., and quite frankly, Trump has been so clumsy and inept, and the staff around him so inept at harnessing the energy that saw him. There were two energies that created POTUS Trump. One of those energies was people who were also sick and tired of the wars on the left and the right. People who were sick and tired of the corruption of the Clinton machine, the Clinton crime syndicate. They were sick and tired of it on the left and the right, and really appalled at what they saw with Libya and Haiti in particular from the Clinton Foundation. So you've got one energy that says, yes, we're going to support this guy. You got another energy, though, which is why Trump is the president. And that second energy was people stayed home. Hillary Clinton's Democratic Party base, I'm talking about Black people now, stayed home. So while this idea that we're going to elect the first woman president and everybody is going to be supportive of that rah-rah, that was what we were told. The actuality is that the Democrats hadn't delivered into those hollowed out areas of the Black community either. And so just because Hillary had a D behind her name, which is the same thing that's going on in Georgia with the congressional race now, if you whip up so much, there's a formula for this. And so if you whip up so much hatred for the POTUS, then people will come out of their lethargy as a result of this whipped up hatred. And that's the formula to whip up this hatred against Trump. And then those people who did not come out for Hillary, otherwise she would not only have gotten more votes as she did, but she would have gotten enough votes to change the electoral college. But when Jill Stein filed the lawsuits for the recounts in selected states, that's when the lie of the Hillary voter was exposed. And then we saw that those people they were fabricating votes because those people stayed home. If those people who stayed home in 2016 come out and vote in 2020, POTUS Trump is history. So you would think that the people who are smart and politically savvy around POTUS Trump would say, okay, let us get control of this policy-making apparatus. We want to drain the swamp. Yeah, let's drain the swamp. And let's do what a POTUS is supposed to do. Let's deliver public policy, not just to our supporters, but to the people of the U.S. And they haven't done it. In fact, the negative, the erasure of the negative, the erasure of the unimplemented negative policy doesn't touch the people, right? Because the unimplemented negative policy was never implemented. So they didn't feel it. So you got rid of TPP. It's an intellectual exercise. Yes, it was a good thing to do, to get rid of TPP, but people didn't feel it. So, but people felt NAFTA. And he has said, okay, we're going to renegotiate NAFTA. And then if we can't renegotiate it, we're going to repeal it. Okay, great. So do something and hurry up doing it. But the POTUS and the staff around him, I don't know who they are, but they made mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake. And one of them is the ethics issue that's going to dog them forever. And why do I say that? Because governance is not running a campaign. Governance is quite different. And the people of the United States expect transparency, and they haven't gotten transparency. So, like, for example, the logs of White House visitors not being made available, and filling out the forms incorrectly, or not filling out the forms at all and getting exemptions from the forms. That's not going to work. And governance is not like a family business where you put all your family members inside the government. No, this isn't some two-pot dictatorship. This is the democracy. Now, I also have come up with my own rationale for changing our political system, but that's another discussion for another time. The problem inherent in republics is that sovereign individuals give their power and their authority over to other individuals. And then those sovereign individuals who have given their power and authority over to the other individuals who happen to be representatives in a government structure, then those sovereign individuals have to go back and ask those representatives to do things for them, which really, in the end, I mean, it really doesn't make any sense. And so perhaps it is time for people of the United States to actually learn from other countries. And they could actually learn from one of the countries that they bombed, which was Libya, the Jamahiriya. Well, apparently Nigel Farage has learned. And so the UKIP now has as its main platform direct democracy. There's direct democracy that used to be in Ireland that got wiped off the Constitution. And so now Ireland has a direct democracy policy. A political party. And so you've got this rumbling now of people wanting to take their sovereignty back. And what is the political system that will best ensure us maintaining our sovereignty? As we look over at the Federal Reserve that has us all around, the noose around the neck. So anyway, what happened to the POTUS? I can't tell you what happened, but maybe a comedy of errors where then you think that, your family members are going to be your family members no matter what. They're going to see you first in the morning when you wake up. They're going to talk to you last at night before you go to sleep, before you start snoring. And yes. So they don't need to have titles inside the White House. I mean, it's unfathomable that this has happened. The cabinet doesn't need to be full of billionaires who are how many times removed from those very people who went to the polls and voted for you with that positive energy. Those who went to the polls and voted for you, how many times is Betsy DeVos sent her kids? And when was the last time her kids, her grandkids, when were they in the local neighborhood public school? So the problems that our people in the United States are facing, the people need to have input into their problems. Okay, so you have Betsy DeVos up there as a nominal, she's the cabinet member. But you better darn round out her staff with people who understand what the real problems are that are facing real Americans.
I think it's time for the American people to come together. Forget about Democrat, forget about Republican, forget about white, forget about black, forget about Asian. I think it's time for us to come together and take our country back from all of these individuals.
It is time for us to come together, but I'm not going to say forget about, because I can't forget about black, because black is what I am and black is who I am. So I'm not willing to forego my identity. I shouldn't have to forego my identity in order to come together with you. So I would say, let us recognize each other's identities and accept each other where we are. So I'm ready to accept you where you are. You accept me where I am. And we work. It's difficult work. It's like a husband and wife. Let us work through our issues, but we know that we have a common goal. And now we might diverge on everything else, but on one thing, say ending these regime change wars, we're together on that. We're together on, let's find out what we are together on. We're together on, at a minimum, auditing the Fed, but we shouldn't just audit the Fed. I think we should nationalize the Fed, right? But maybe I go too far. So let's just say we're going to audit the Fed. And we're together on that. We're together on the need for constitutional rule of law in the United States. And we want to take back the Bill of Rights. Maybe we can come together on that. And so if we can come together on that, I say this is work well worth it. And that is the basis on which Robert Steele and I have come together, and I see so much of commentary about Robert. And, I can only go on my experience with him. And the experience that I've had with him is that he's been open. Mr. Open Source Everything needs to be open. He's been transparent and he's full of ideas. And I like those ideas about going around the CNNs and the Foxes and all of that, because they've totally discredited themselves. They've been discredited for a very long time. But it's only now that some people are waking up, and I'm glad that they're waking up. But these are the issues that I was dealing with 17 years ago when I was crying out for help, because I saw what was happening after September 11th. After September 11th, I saw even more clearly, but even before September 11th, and people call me loony and kooky, conspiracy theorist, every name you could call. But I was just explaining a divide that I was witnessing firsthand in the government of the United States and alerting the people to the problem. So I was inconvenient. And now, 17 years later, now people are coming to me and saying, yeah, I thought you were a hater. They said you hated white people. But you see, these are the mechanisms of oppression as outlined by Paulo Freire. One of those mechanisms is divide and rule. And so now I'm a student of the COINTELPRO era and the COINTELPRO papers. I've studied the counterintelligence program that was run primarily by the FBI, but also by every aspect of the U.S. government against certain individuals that it targeted because of the way those individuals thought. And so the COINTELPRO papers, if you look at the one from 1968 that talks about the, not 68, 67, that talks about Black nationalist hate groups. What it outlines as a policy that was carried out, by the way, and I believe still is being carried out, is to make sure that blacks and whites remain separated. And so if they can manipulate, they say also that there will never be another Black Messiah that they haven't already picked. And so if they can manipulate people so that the blacks are and the whites and the Muslims and the Latinos, the immigrant communities, so that everybody is always at each other's throat, then we don't get to pay attention to who's actually orchestrating this. So another clue for me was when Janet Napolitano said that I need to be afraid of the militia. Well, now, I'm from Georgia. I'm from the South. I'm from the Confederacy, right? Mm-hmm. So I understand white folk probably better than many say, Boston, Northern whites understand Southern whites. And I can figure out a way to work with them. I had to sit for over an hour with the gentleman who described for me how the Ku Klux Klan was just really a misunderstood organization. And so the Ku Klux Klan is misunderstood. And I sat and I listened to him. And at the end of my interview, because I was trying to get his support, because I wanted to get elected to Congress. And when you want to get elected, you talk to everybody. You're supposed to. And that's when, I walked out of that room with his endorsement. And he had to go back to his members and tell the members of his organization that he had actually endorsed me. Oh man, they were very upset about it. But it shows the power of two individuals who are able to sit down and talk to each other. If there's possibility for us to meet heart to heart, we will understand each other. And that's what happened in that cavernous room when I met with my Ku Klux Klan guy. And eventually, when I was in the Congress, the Klanners began to come to me because I would give them representation. So what we have to be willing to do is accept each other where we are, where they are, and say, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to talk to you where you are. I respect you. We start off that way. And when Janet Napolitano wrote this memo and said we need to be afraid of militia people, then I said, well, I'm going to go talk to some militia people. And I'm going to talk to the Christian identity people. And I'm going to find anybody who's willing to talk to me, right? Right. So I can prove her wrong because she is exercising a kind of repression that ultimately will end up keeping us all divided and we will never be able to come together.
True.
So now, yes, I agree with you that we need to take our country back.
Yes.
But we need to take our country back with a kind of insight about each other so we don't fall into the same old historical traps of disrespect for each other and ultimate oppression and repression and oppression.
I agree. Cynthia, I really appreciate you coming on the X22 Report Spotlight. I really do. How can people see your work and get your books and things like that? Where should they go?
Well, let's see. I need to update my website, but my website is pretty viewable. It's just not completely updated. allthingscynthiamckinney.com. And then they can even reach out to me on the contact page. And I get every one of those emails. I save them all and I respond to all of them.
Cynthia, thank you very much for being on the Spotlight. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the invitation. Bye.
Bye.